ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you on our last seminar, Friday seminar on our department before the summer starts. And it is my pleasure to present to you my dear, I may say already colleague, Spyridon, because we collaborated on this book on agency, which I presented to you last week. And Spyridon has a rich history in terms of education. He studied, he's a physicist by education, right? He studied
and engineer.
And yeah, you studied mechanical engineering and theoretical physics. Then you skipped to philosophy of science. You did your PhD in philosophy of science, and you got habilitated in process philosophy and biophilosophy on the Technical University of Berlin, where you still remain as a teacher, right? Yeah. And I think Spyridon is a good fit for our department because his interest always lied in biophilosophies of Ixkuil, Canguilhem, Jonas, Adolf Portman, and his interest also lies in process philosophy. That's what interested me.
Bergson and Whitehead, especially.
Bergson mostly and Whitehead. Yeah. So he would like to present to you today a topic on essence and hopefully answer the question whether does an organism determine its own individual essence. So
yes,
and have the answer.
And
you have the answer to the question.
I believe so.
Implicit.
And of course, Spyridon wrote several books, and papers.
This is my my main work. It's in German. And
Organismus als Prozess.
Yes. So, and the others are here some edited volumes in English. But okay,
could you pass those around?
Yes, but maybe after the lecture. Can I do?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is very important because it's going to be long. Sorry. So, and this is the microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I hope it's on. Yeah. So thank you very much, Ayana, for the introduction. And also thank you all of you for appearing here and for inviting me. I'm very honored. So first, let me make some general remarks about choosing this topic. So a short introduction about the significance of the concept of essence for the theory of organism. And at the beginning, I would like to explain why the problem of the essence of the organism is important. When we think about the ontological understanding of organisms, we inevitably have to position ourselves on the ontological concept of essence. This concept occupies a central position in Occidental philosophy because it refers to the identity of individual entities of various constitutions or of groups of such entities. So we can talk about the identity or the essence of a particular thing, but also about the essence of a group of things, a species, for example, a biological species. And this is what I'm going to do today. The essence of a being is its identity. So even if the concept of essence is declared irrelevant in relation to organisms, this statement about the irrelevance of essence for an organism has high philosophical relevance for the understanding of the organism. I will not refer here to the debate between essentialists and anti-essentialists in contemporary Anglo-Saxon philosophy of biology. Starting from the philosophical concept of essence and systems theoretical considerations, I will develop my own interpretation of the idea of the individual essence of a single organism, which is present in the current philosophy of biology. In particular, I will try to show that every organism has a dynamic processual individual essence and not a static one. The purpose of this undertaking is to express the idea of the autonomy of the organism in a particular way. which is firmly anchored in the history and present of Occidental ontology. So I hope you will see the point that even asking the question whether a particular organism has an individual essence and whether this essence is static or not, whether it determines its essence, is something that you can only ask about organisms and not about the entities of contemporary physics. So it is another way to talk about the organismic autonomy, actually, asking this question. So this is the structure of the presentation. But the first section is about a very short history about the concept of essence in Occidental philosophy. Philosophers among you know everything that I'm going to present here. In the second point, we will talk about the essence of an individual organism in the contemporary Anglo-Saxon philosophy of biology. I will talk about the collective essence of an organism. This has to do with the essence of the species and about the individual essence of a particular organism. In the third section, we will talk about the collective and individual essence of physical systems and biomolecular entities. I will present two examples, one from a very simple physical system and the systems biological model. And the fourth and most complex section is about the organismic mode of being. And I ask there the question whether an intrinsic determination of the individual essence occurs in each particular organism. And the most important thing here is the question mark at the end. I'm not going to present a final response. Actually, I want to show why this question is important. So a few remarks about essence. The Latin word essentia was created to reflect Aristotle's technical term toti en ine, whose translation into Latin caused great difficulty. With this expression, Aristotle refers to what an individual being is, that is, to its nature or essence. In metaphysics, Aristotle says that the toti en ine, and thus the essence of a thing, is its definition. So the first thing to keep in mind is the simplest, actually, essence of something is its definition. It's not very helpful. In another passage in metaphysics, the toti en ine is identified with the central Aristotelian concept of eidos, or eidos. In Aristotle's writings, the eidos of an individual thing is reflected by a general concept, a universal, which, when predicated of that thing, describes its nature or suchness or what something is. For example, the universal word oak, when it is predicated of a particular tree, reflects what this tree is, the whatness of the tree. So the universal species, so you can say this tree over there or that tree over there is an oak. So oak is the essence. This means the species is the essence of this particular tree. With regard to the Aristotelian writings, we can therefore assume the identity of the essence of an individual thing with a universal species, the eidos or kind, attributed to it. So the second point, the first one was the essence's definition. The second is essence is the universal category to which something belongs. In metaphysics, Aristotle does not limit the meaning of eidos to the description of the essence of an individual thing, but also understands it as the cause or the aetion of that thing's being. From this, it is clear that Aristotle considers the essence of a thing primarily as the cause of its suchness or whatness or quiddity. Quiddity is the English translation of the Latin word quidditas, which means actually what something is, the whatness of something. A similar thought connecting the essence of a thing with the intrinsic reason or law of its suchness was expressed more than, I think it is there. More than 23 centuries later by Charles Sanders Peirce. Peirce, I quote him, "The essence is rather the idea of a thing, the law of its being, that which makes it the kind of thing to which it belongs, that which is expressed in its definition." So the third point we can say, the third thing we can say about essence is not just the definition and the eidos or the universal category, but the cause of something, the law that makes something what it is. Starting from a dynamic interpretation of the word nature, rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, Thomas Aquinas puts emphasis on a central dimension of the Aristotelian understanding of essence that anticipates the philosophical essentialism of the present, as we will see shortly. So yes, there is a philosophical essentialism in today's philosophy of science. So I quote Aquinas from Being and Essence, chapter 1, paragraph 10. "The word nature signifies the essence of a real thing to the extent that nature refers to the activity," that's important, "the activity within the world characteristic of that thing, since no real thing lacks a proper operation." End of quote. So this is a new aspect, actually. For Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, then, there is a strong connection between the essence of a thing and the activities typical of its constitution. So the fourth thing that we can keep in mind is essence has to do with activities, with what a thing does in the real world. The concrete actions or operations of a thing or entity in the world depend on its so-called dispositions, a very essential word for the whole discussion about essence, especially at the present, the connection between essence and dispositions. So what are these dispositions? They are the natural inclinations to act or react in a characteristic manner when suitable circumstances arise in the environment. So the history of Occidental philosophy reveals two different ways of relating the essence of an entity to its dispositions. The first and simplest one, the essence of an entity is equated with the totality of its dispositions. It's problematic, actually, because nobody knows how many dispositions something has. Second point, and most interesting for us, the essence of an entity is treated as the reason or cause of its dispositions. So, reason or cause of the possible activities that something can have in the world. This understanding of essence found, as we have seen in the writings of Aristotle, Aquinas, and Peirce, and not only in the writings of these three authors, finds clear expression in the third book of John Locke's Essay on Human Understanding under the term real essence. So now to the 17th century, Locke, third book, essence may be taken for the being of anything whereby it is what it is, and thus the real internal constitution of things whereon their discoverable qualities depend. So what are the discoverable qualities? For example, the dispositions that we can discover. And the essence is that whereon those dispositions actually depend. And this may be called their essence. So Locke compares the real internal constitution of things, their real essence. He has also the term nominal essence, but this is another thing. So he compares the real essence of things with, I quote, the springs and wheels and other contrivances within of the famous clock at Strasbourg. Third book of essay, chapter 6. Comparing the essence of an entity with a mechanism is not unique to the 17th century, for as we will see, a current version of mechanistic thinking represents an important basis for contemporary biological essentialism. The topic of the essence of entities of various types and complexity is also the subject of current analytical philosophy and philosophy of science. For adherents of these schools, which could be assigned to so-called essentialism, the essence of an entity is its dispositions, the essence of an entity and its dispositions are inextricably linked. So the analytic philosophers of the present and of the last decades put a lot of emphasis on the connection between essence and dispositions. So for the analytical philosopher of science, Romano Harrer, the different dispositions of a physical entity, such as the hydrogen atom, for example, I quote, its disposition to form diatomic molecules and its disposition to combine with oxygen can be traced back to a common nature, that is to the structure of hydrogen as a simple one electron, one proton structure, and this is its essential nature, Harrer in original, essential nature, that is, it enters into the account of all its dispositions. So what he says here is actually that the essence explains the dispositions. In other words, the dispositions of an entity are determined by its essence, which Harrer equates with its material structure, which Locke refers to as its real internal constitution. So the material structure of something, one proton, one electron system, the hydrogen atom, explain its dispositions. Therefore, the material structure of something is its essence. And this reminds us to what Locke said about the clock of Strasbourg, the real internal constitution. The analytical philosopher Claudine Torcelin makes two important statements in her presentation of dispositional essentialism. This is how she calls her theory, dispositional essentialism. Starting first from the primacy of the essence over the dispositions, and second, from the invariance of the essence of the elementary physical entities, she comes to the conclusion that the dispositions of the latter, of the elementary physical entities, are invariant. So this is a new point, the invariance of essence, the invariance of dispositions. And this is actually the only thing that I have found in analytical papers about essence that are written in the last years and decades. So this is a very characteristic statement. I quote Torcelin, "It is essential to the nature of the proton that it is disposed to interact with things of various kinds precisely as it does. The most elementary kinds of things all have fixed causal powers. That means their dispositional properties are all fixed by their essential natures. You cannot change any of their dispositional properties. There can be no question of a copper atom, for example, being disposed to behave in one way at one time, but in a different way at another time." Okay, so this idea of the invariance of the essence of entities and their dispositions determined by it, which arises from the worldview of modern physics, which, as you probably know or agree, I don't know, is has a very dominant position in contemporary philosophy of science. It is more or less, in my opinion, a physicalistic approach. So this position, which arises from the worldview of modern physics, plays an important role in contemporary biological essentialism as well. A central question in my lecture, however, is whether the assumption that the essence of an individual organism is fixed is justified. So the second section on the essence of an individual organism in the contemporary Anglo-Saxon philosophy of biology. One of the best known representatives of biological essentialism in the present is the philosopher of biology Michael David. He attributes intrinsic essence, his words, intrinsic essence to species and other taxonomic units, as well as to individual organisms. Since he sees in the essence of each particular organism a strong presence of the essence of its species, I will first present David's idea about the collective essence of a species. So, for David, I quote, the essence, nature, or identity, so you see again, essence and identity is identity of a biological taxon. So the essence, nature, or identity of a biological taxon is the property in virtue of which an object is member of a certain kind, end of quote. Drawing on the distinction between structural and historical or evolutionary explanation in biology, so he has this distinction, not only he, also other philosophers of biology, that there are structural explanations and there are historical explanations. And by historical explanations, they mean evolutionary explanations, actually. So, based on this distinction, David claims that structural explanations require intrinsic essences. The intrinsic essence of a species explains the features of its members. So I quote, why does it? Because for an organism to be, say, a tiger, is for it to have the intrinsic underlying nature of tigers. And that nature, in combination with the environment, causes its phenotypic feature, its morphology, physiology, and behavior. The same underlying properties that make the organism a tiger cause it to be striped. That is why being a tiger is explanatory. Another quote from the same article, a species essence acts on its member of the species, making it the kind of thing that it is. So here you see that David, and this is a point that he makes again and again in his writings, essence explains, is explanatory. It explains the features of something. The essence of every species is for David the common, I quote, so the essence of the species is the common, I quote, underlying genetic structure of its members, a structure that causes its phenotypic properties. The underlying structure makes the taxon explanatory, end of quote. So although David often closely associates biological essences with genetic structures, in his writings, he knows that phenotypic properties are produced by very complex regulatory networks of genetic and other biochemical reactions, rather than by simple, discrete, causal pathways of individual genes or small groups of them. David's intrinsic biological essentialism, this is how he describes his theory, intrinsic biological essentialism, does not require the assumption that the path from genes to phenotypes is simple and easily understandable. So although he talks about he says that the essence is the genetic structure of the species, he doesn't say that there is a linear, simple connection between genes and phenotypes. So he knows everything about the complexity of the connection between phenotype and genes. So David places his essentialism under the umbrella term of mechanism. When he says that, I quote, a species essence will be a causal mechanism that acts on its member of the species, making it the kind of thing that it is, end of quote. As we will soon see, contemporary biological essentialism does not consider only the collective essence of organisms through the lens of mechanism. So David and other philosophers of biology say also that the individual essence of a particular organism is a mechanism. And this is very important for this lecture today. So what has been said so far about the essence of a biological species or taxon is consistent with a Platonic, and with some reservations with the Aristotelian tradition, which limits the idea or eidos or form, which is the essence of an individual in a universal category that the individual shares with all other members of its species. Plato speaks only of universal ideal forms. So the essence in Platonic writings is always something universal. The notion of individual ideal forms or individual essences is alien to Plato's thought. The first decisive departure from this idea can be found in Plotinus' Enneads. So Plotinus is the first philosopher, Greek philosopher at least, and the first Platonic philosopher who talks explicitly about individual essences. So Plotinus says, for example, that each one of us here has its individual essence. And this is something metaphysical. I can say more about that later. So you find that in the 5th book of the Enneads. But he restricts the idea of the individual essence only to humans. Only human beings have individual essences. Animals do not, plants do not. Okay? So, back to our time. Contemporary biological essentialists have no reservations about ascribing a unique individual essence to each organism. So now we move from the essence of the species to the individual essence. So from the collective essence to the individual essence of particular organisms. According to De Witt, who doesn't mention, he's a typical philosopher of analytical philosopher. He doesn't care about history, about Plotinus or about Plato or Aristotle, but he has, of course, there are predecessors. What is the English word? Predecessors? Predecessors. Okay, you know. And they wrote those things 1800 years before De Witt. Yeah, but he doesn't know. Anyway, so according to De Witt, if a single organism O is a member of taxon T, the essence of that organism, essence of O, EO, includes, but is not limited to the essence of that taxon ET, essence of taxon. So if O has the intrinsic components of the essence EO, it also has the intrinsic components of the essence ET. But in addition, it has intrinsic components that ET does not have. The individual essence EO determines the dispositions of O, which explains its phenotypic characteristics under different environmental conditions. The individual intrinsic essence of a particular organism determines not only the disposition that it shares with its conspecifics, the other members of its species, but also dispositions that only belong to that single individual. So the fact that O, I quote De Witt, the fact that O is Benji and not just a tiger explains a whole lot about its phenotypic properties, including many, like a particular face marking, that O has not simply because it is a tiger. The essential nature of Benji to be discovered by biologists causes him in his environment to have those properties. The same intrinsic nature or essence that partly makes something Benji, partly explains both why he is striped and why being Benji is explanatory. So he thinks that what explains the features of a particular organism is an individual essence that is not identical with the essence of the species. And exactly this thought can be found in Plotinus, by the way. This is exactly the same, but it's not about tigers in Plotinus. It's not only about humans. So Plotinus says really that our individual, and he talks about the nose, the form of the nose, it has to do with differences in the individual essences of particular humans. So, yes. David also refers to the individual essences of particular organisms as mechanisms. The intrinsic essence, I quote him, the intrinsic essence of Benji is a causal mechanism. He doesn't even question this term. What does mechanism mean, actually?
Excuse me, I am lost. Who is Benji?
Benji is the name of a tiger, a particular tiger.
It's not a human being.
No, it's a tiger. Probably a Bengal tiger, I don't know. And he has a particular face marking. You know, he's striped in a particular way.
Yeah, everybody knows Benji.
So long before David, Hare also approached the individual essence of an organism through the idea of mechanism. So you find it in the whole literature, and Hare did that in 1970, but it didn't change. You find it again and again. The essence is a mechanism. Whatever the essence is, it is a mechanism. So the third, chapter 3, or section 3, on the collective and individual essence of physical systems in biomolecular entities. So here I'm going to present two examples, and this has to do with my interpretation of the connection between essence and mechanism. So the term mechanism occupies a central place in both the modern life sciences and today's mainstream philosophy of science. Biological textbooks and articles are replete with references to genetic, metabolic, biochemical, and other types of mechanisms, such as the mechanism of photosynthesis, digestion, respiration, the action of drugs, etc. One of the most dynamically developing areas of contemporary philosophy of science is the so-called new mechanical philosophy or new mechanism. Its leading advocates have introduced several definitions of the term mechanism into the philosophy of biology in recent decades. So we will approach the complicated relationship between biological mechanisms and the individual essence of a particular organism in 3 steps. We begin with the relationship between the individual essence of a simple physical system and its mathematical mechanism. So first step, it's a very, very simple physical system. One of the simplest systems with the study of which modern physics began in the 17th century is the frictionless pendulum. So I'm going to talk about the essence of pendulum. The material mechanism Okay. The material mechanism of a mechanical pendulum is the technical structure consisting of the pivot. Is it's possible to
it's very difficult because this is light and this also contains light, so it's light plus light.
Okay,
Maybe
you have the.
But you can use this. Look, it's the best.
Or mouse.
Yeah.
If you want
Laser pointer.
It's
the Bob the pendulum and Benji the tiger, and they are
okay, here's the pivot. This is the frictionless pivot. We have the rod with a length L and the massive bob at the end. And this is actually the angle phi. And so the differential equation that describes the oscillation of a pendulum of length L in a gravitational field of intensity or strength G is this one. This is the formula that describes the pendulum. So this is the acceleration the angular acceleration, and multiplied with the mass, it's the force that puts it back, so to say. And this force is mass multiplied with the gravitational intensity, G, that it changes, of course, independence of the planet on which you put the pendulum, and the zenus of the phi. So since you have mass here and here, you can delete it, and this is the final formula that describes the acceleration. It's a differential equation, and it describes the acceleration or the dynamics of the pendulum. So if the amplitude phi max, the maximum amplitude is small, then zenus phi is equal to phi, and so this is the final formula. This differential equation contains two dynamic quantities or variables: the angle phi and the angular velocity, the phi divided by dt. And it contains also two static quantities. So we have here the two variables, phi and the phi dt. And we have here two parameters, two static quantities: the intensity of the gravitational field and the length L of the pendulum. The rho L and the intensity of the gravitational field, these are the two static quantities. The separation between variables and parameters is of great importance in the theory of dynamic systems. This differential equation is the abstract mathematical mechanism. So the simple formula over there is the abstract mathematical mechanism that determines the behavior of the frictionless pendulum under different external conditions, which in this case means under different intensities of the gravitational field. This differential equation, or abstract mechanism, or abstract mathematical mechanism, determines the dispositions of the pendulum. It is the cause or law of its behavior. Therefore, the mathematical mechanism or different equation of the pendulum can be considered its essence. By solving this equation, the period of the pendulum's oscillation can be calculated. This is the period, how much time it takes to move from the start position and go back to it. And from this formula, one can see that one and the same pendulum of length L has the tendency to swing faster as gravity increases. The behavior of a dynamic system under specific external conditions is described in physics and in systems biology and other disciplines by so-called state spaces. So here you can see if you increase the gravity, if you put it on Jupiter, for example, then the period decreases, it swings faster. And if you decrease it, if you put it on the moon, the same pendulum will swing much slower. And I'm going to show that now through the state spaces. It's important to talk about state spaces because the whole modern theoretical dynamics works with state spaces. So here we have two state spaces. State spaces are abstract spaces. So they have nothing to do with the three-dimensional space of our ordinary experience. They are abstract spaces, and in the whose dimensions represent the variables of the system. The number of dimensions of these state spaces, in the case of pendulum, there are only two, the angle and the angular velocity, is identical to the number of variables in the systems. So here you see, take that for Earth. we have the angular velocity and the angle. 2 dimensions, just 2 dimensions. The dynamic behavior of the system or its change of state, that is the change of the values of its variables, is described by trajectories in the state space. The blue line here is the trajectory. So if you take, for example, this point here of the blue line, what does it say? It says that the angular velocity has the maximal value, and the angle is 0. So this means that your pendulum is moving through the lowest point, okay? And angle 0, and it's 5. It has the highest velocity. And then you go along this trajectory. The value of the angular velocity decreases, and the value of the angle increases. So, for example, if you come here to this point, you have the maximum value of the angle and velocity 0. So you have reached the maximum angle, okay? And then you fall back. So you go back and forth, back and forth. And this moving back and forth is here represented by the cyclical form of the trajectory. If you put it on the moon, the same pendulum on the moon, the velocity will be much lower. And you know that if you put a pendulum on the moon, it will swing much slower, much slower. So the velocity, the highest velocity, will be much lower than on Earth. If you put it on Jupiter, it will move much faster than on Earth, okay? So why am I saying those things? The trajectories in the 2 state spaces shown above depict the behavior of the same pendulum in different gravitational fields. That is, the trajectories illustrate the disposition of this pendulum to behave under different external conditions. So we have one and the same disposition described by the essence, by the formula, by the equation. And if you put different external conditions to this one disposition, you get 2 different behaviors, the behavior on Moon and the behavior on Earth. So now, a very important point. Since the meaning of trajectories, so what the trajectories represent, is determined by the constitution of their state space, the disposition they represent derives its identity from the constitution of the corresponding state space. So each of these dimensions that define the state space has a particular quality. In this case, you have the angular velocity in here, the angle. There could be also totally different qualities. So this trajectory describes the dispositions, and these dispositions depend on the qualities of these dimensions. So this means that from this follows that if the number or quality of the variables of a system, and thus the number or quality of the dimension of its state space, change, the dispositions of the system and thus its essence also change. So if you change the variables, if you change the state space, you change the essence. There is therefore an inextricable connection between the essence of a system and the qualitative and quantitative constitution of its state space. A similarly inextricable connection also exists between the essence of a system and some of the parameters within its differential equations. I distinguish between system internal parameters, such as the length L of the pendulum rod, and system external parameters, such as the strength G of the gravitational field. The system internal parameters represent quantities that make an important contribution to the constitution of the system, and thus to determining its essence and its dispositions. So if you change the length, you change the dispositions, you change the essence. The system external parameters represent external conditions under which the system's dispositions develop concrete behavior. So the system's internal parameters are, so to say, essential parameters. The system external parameters are, so to say, accidental parameters, to use more philosophical language. So the belonging of the system internal parameters to the essence of the system makes it possible to distinguish between the collective essence of a type of dynamic system and the individual essence of a single system of this type. The collective essence of the universal type pendulum is defined for all possible values of the length L. So in my opinion, this can be described, this formula describes the collective essence of all types of pendulum. Yeah? In contrast, the individual essence of a particular pendulum depends on the specific value of its system internal parameter, that is of the specific length L, say L1 of its rod. So if you take a particular L1, a particular length, then you have a particular essence that applies only to that L1. And this has dispositions, and if you put it on the moon, it will behave in a particular way, on Earth in another way, on Jupiter in another way, but all these ways are described by the essence, by this formula. If you know how strong the G is, then you can predict everything. So this is my interpretation of the individual essence of a very simple physical system. So now to the second step to our approach to the question. As a second step in our approach to the problem of the individual essence of a particular organism, we turn to a systems biological model that was published several years ago in the journal Nature and is considered a milestone in the development of so-called synthetic biology. The model is based on the operant model of bacterial gene regulation, which was proposed by François Jacob and Jacques Monod in 1961. The article published in Nature is about the mutual interference between two genes. Each of the promoters of the two genes is blocked by a repressor protein. The synthesis of repressor 1 requires a gene whose transcription is initiated by promoter 2. And the synthesis of repressor 2 requires a gene whose transcription is initiated by promoter 1. Two substances, inductors 1 and 2, are also involved in this process as external conditions, the presence of which inhibits the inhibition processes, ultimately supporting the activation of the blocked genes. So here is the simple graph, the graph of this simple systems biological model. Here you have a gene for repressor 2, and the repressor 2 protein inhibits the promoter that activates the gene that produces the repressor 1 protein. And this repressor 1 protein inhibits the promoter that activates gene 2. So both genes inhibit each other, and you have also the inductors from outside that inhibit the inhibition processes. So everything inhibits everything here, but interestingly enough, it has a dynamic that is surprising. So the dynamics of this negative feedback system can be described by two variables, the concentrations of the two repressor molecules. Their variation can be represented by two differential equations, which together constitute a single mathematical mechanism. So this is the mathematical mechanism that describes the dynamic of this small regulatory genetic path. In these so-called dimensionless equations, the variables u, and v, we have again two variables, correspond to the concentrations of the repressor proteins 1 and 2. Tau corresponds to the time. The quantities alpha and beta, here alpha and beta, stand for the effective synthesis rates of the repressor proteins. Gamma symbolizes here gamma and delta here. So gamma symbolizes the cooperativity of the repression of promoter 2, and delta, the cooperativity of repression of promoter 1. Since the quantities alpha, beta, gamma, and delta belong to the system, they are system internal parameters. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta are system internal parameters, similar to the L in our pendulum. But their values can, however, be influenced by the experimenters, but usually they are kept constant for each individual experiment. So they determine the values of the parameters and they make the experiment. By experiment, in most cases, they mean a computer simulation. Nobody can solve this system without a computer. But the experimenters also regulate the concentrations of the externally added inductors, which are therefore to be regarded as the system external parameters. So these are, in my opinion, the system external parameters. Inductor 2 and inductor 1, similar to the gravitational field in our pendulum. So if the system external and system internal parameters are set appropriately to each other, a so-called bistable behavior arises. In the bistable mode, the system can reach two different stable end states. The corresponding state space with some of the possible trajectories arising depending on the initial conditions looks as follows. So here's the state space. You see again, we have a two-dimensional state space because we have two variables, U and V, the concentrations of the repressor molecules. And so under certain external conditions, the concentration of the inductors, and for certain values of the system's internal parameters, a bistable behavior of the system emerges. So what you can see here is that the state space is separated into two parts, and this line is called separatrix. For all initial values, all initial concentrations of U and V above this line, the system ends here, somewhere here. This is the Z1 point, and it is called an attractor because it seems as if it were attracting all the trajectories. So this has an end state directed system, a teleological system, so to say, and for all possible combinations of the variables above the separatrix, you will end here. For all possible values of the combinations of U and V below the separatrix, you will end here. And therefore it is, and both states, Z1 and Z2, are stable. If you end there, you end there and stay there. So by varying the initial conditions, the bistable system can be understood as a so-called genetic Tugle-Schwytz. Genetic Tugle-Schwytz. The individual essence of a particular genetic Tugle-Schwytz, again, the individual essence of a particular genetic Tugle-Schwytz of the operon model depends on the specific values of its system internal parameters, alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. So this is how I would describe the individual essence of a particular genetic Tugle-Schwytz in the operon model. This means I put concrete system internal parameters. And again, this system has this disposition. Now, section 4, on the uniqueness of the organismic mode of being. This is the last section. The intrinsic determination of the individual essence of each organism, with question mark at the end. Systems biologists also work with large models consisting of many chaotic differential equations representing complex genetic, metabolic, and signaling networks within and between cells that can only be calculated by computers. So what we saw here was a very simple systems biological model, and it has a complex behavior, but in systems biology, there are also large systems of equations with many variables and a huge number of parameters sometimes. Of particular interest for the problem of the individual essence of a single organism are the simulations of entire cells, the so-called whole cell simulations. A computer simulation of the cell cycle of the bacterium Mycoplasma genitalium was published in 2012 by a group of biophysicists and biotechnologists from Stanford University and the Craig Venter Institute. The model, I quote, includes more than 1900 experimentally observed parameters, which are necessary for the calculation of a few hundred variables. Models like these are abstract mechanisms and can help us answer the question of the individual essence of a single organism because, like all mechanisms, they determine dispositions. So in systems biology, I attended a conference in November in Paris, and one of the biologists who was there said that the problem with biological state spaces is that they are ridiculously large. You have hundreds or even thousands of dimensions. Okay, this means hundreds or even thousands of differential equations. If you really do such a computer simulation.
And Spyridon, can you explain maybe, in case of bacteria, what are parameters and what are variables? In case of bacteria, if we want to model Mycoplasma.
Yes, I think I was going to do that.
Sorry, okay.
So the variables are, for example, the concentrations of proteins, what changes in the different phases of the, and parameters are things like kinetic rates of biomolecular reactions, the velocity of something, or degree of activation of enzymes, or pH.
But these parameters will change on this, depending on the states of all thousands of others.
I know. And I'm going to talk about.
You don't have simply U and V as in pendulum.
I know.
Of course, that's the point of the lecture.
This is the next point.
Variables do change depending on each other, but parameters do not.
They do.
No, then it's variable. Then it's completely fine, but then it should be defined as variable.
Parameters are the relations within the system, and the variables are the values of the system.
Yeah.
Okay,
so parameters don't change.
Okay.
Exactly.
So let's leave it for the heated discussion.
I'm not going to answer these questions. You can have arguments here, but please let me. So in the final part of this lecture, I will resort to the tried and tested method of the thought experiment. So I'm going to construct a thought experiment. We imagine a system of coupled differential equations that can do more than just simulate the change of state, that is the trajectory of the dynamics of the real cell. So what do I mean by can do more than that? Above all, this trajectory should be generated through mathematical operations that represent as realistically as possible the real material events within real cells as we at least currently know them. So the existing models of whole cell simulations work under some biologically unrealistic assumptions. For example, to name just one, that the inhomogeneous distribution of substances in a real cell can be ignored. Some assumptions that would bring our thought experiment closer to the material relationships and phenomena within real cells are as follows. So these are my assumptions. First, the model contains variables, each of which represents the concentration of a specific kind of biomolecule, such as a kind of protein. Since there are many kinds of proteins and other molecules in every cell, the associated system of equations contains a very high number of differential equations, and the corresponding state space contains an equal number of dimensions. So we have huge state spaces. Second, both the form and the number of the differential equations change constantly during the simulation of the cell cycle. Because in the different phases of the cell cycle, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, etc., new types of proteins are constantly emerging. That is, new variables that of course have to be integrated into the system of equations. The generations of new variables also necessarily means that both the qualitative constitution of the corresponding state space and the number of its dimensions are constantly subject to change. Third assumption. The values of the system internal parameters, and this is your point, are not specified by the experimenters. I'm not talking about how systems biology today works. I'm talking about my system, about my thought experiments, but are determined by the cell itself. Current research shows that both unicellular organisms and cells of multicellular organisms are able to specifically control the course of their intracellular molecular reactions through the modifications of the binding affinities between single biomolecules, for example, proteins or DNA, to their ligands, for example, drugs or inhibitors. This enables the cells to regulate the kinetic rates of particular intracellular biochemical reactions, so that in physiological settings, these rates can vary of orders of magnitude. So this is not something that I say. This is, I am in contact with a group of physicians who do systems biology in Italy, in Rome, and they told me that in a real cell, during the process, some of these parameters can vary even in orders of magnitude. This is what they say, and they have published that. It is also well known that the regulation of the architecture of its own cytoskeleton enables the cell to influence intracellular enzymatic reactions. So this is the group, no, I don't have there. Giuliani is one of these people, Bizzari is the other one, and they are professors in La Sapienza in Rome, and they say that, for example, the cytoskeleton, that cells are able, eukaryotic cells, of course, are able to manipulate their cytoskeleton in order to influence intracellular enzymatic reactions. So these and other contemporary findings correspond with the fact that real organisms are capable of varying, or more exactly, fine-tuning the values of the quantities that in systems biological mechanisms are represented by constant parameters. These assumptions, these three assumptions, are irrelevant for today's systems biology, because they would make the already very difficult work of systems biologists extremely difficult. This assumption only makes sense in the context of my thought experiment. And with this thought experiment, I'm not trying to solve any biological problems, but simply to gain clarity about the purely philosophical idea of the individual essence of a particular organism using the means of modern biological systems theory. So, we have seen above that there is an inseparable connection between the essence of a system of equations, or abstract mechanism on the one hand, and the qualitative and quantitative constitution of its state space and its system internal parameters on the other. But this means nothing less than the following. So, if first, the form of a specific system of equations representing a particular organism, or second, if just the values or qualities of its system internal parameters are changed, as assumptions 2 and 3 of my thought experiment require, the dispositions of this system of equations and thus its individual essence change. At this point, however, the following question arises. Does my statement about the transformation of the individual essence which is made for the mathematical modeling of a cell also apply to a real living cell? Or does it remain valid only for its mathematical representation? So you can, of course, ask, okay, even if the essence of the mathematical mechanism changes, can you apply this result to a real living cell? I believe that the possibility that the real cell transforms its individual essence needs to be seriously considered, because the hypothetical system of equations in my thought experiment should be thought of as being so comprehensive that it reproduces the structure of material events in a real cell with a high degree of accuracy. So if you have a model that can be understood as realistic, then what we said about the transformation of the essence of a model can be applied, in my opinion, to the cell. You can at least ask this question. If you have a very unrealistic model, then of course not. So the answer to the question of whether a concrete organism determines its individual essence depends on the answer to the following question. In a real living cell, is there an invariant causal factors that controls the changes in the cell's material constitution, represented in my thought experiment by the sequence of successive and mutually replacing systems of equations? Within the materialistic worldview that is dominant in modern biology, I see two possible answers. First answer, a mechanism that would remain invariable during the cell cycle because cell dynamics had no causal influence on it, would control the structural transformation of the cell, the phases of which are represented by the sequence of successive systems of equations. Since the mechanism could be the law of cell dynamics, the latter could be subject to an invariable law. Then the individual essence of a particular real cell would be fixed and would not change. Such a static mechanism of invariable essence would be, for example, what was previously and still is often called a genetic program. So if you think, for example, that a genetic program controls all the emergence of new variables or of parameters if they change, then you have the answers. You say, okay, your system of equation changes, but this change is controlled by a higher level mechanism. So the essence of this higher level mechanism is static, and the essence of the organism does not change. So again, if a genetic program controls all these other changes. The second answer, from a systems theoretic perspective, the following possibility can be considered. The respective system of equations that would be valid at a point in time would calculate its successor. This means that each form of the system of equations would emerge causally from the form immediately preceding it. The entire sequence of abstract mathematical mechanisms would therefore be rolled up in the first member of the sequence. So if you have a system of equations and the computation of that or the solution of that is another system, and the second system computes a third and the third a fourth, then you have all this sequence rolled up in the first member of the sequence. In this case, we could say that the entire sequence of transformation has a single individual essence that is invariable. Its essence would be identical to the individual essence of the first system of equations in the sequence. In the context of my thought experiment, we would then be justified in assuming the existence of one invariable individual essence of a living cell. So now a few comments to these two possibilities. The idea of a genetic program is, as far as I am informed, no longer accepted by many biologists today. This applies even more to systems biologists for whom genes are not components of a program, but merely elements of a complex biomolecular structure. Regarding the second possibility, the possibility that each one of these systems computes the next one, I can only say that I have never seen in systems biology or in any other field a sequence of systems of equations, each of which calculates its successor. I also suspect that this is not possible for mathematical reasons. So I think, always within the framework of my thought experiment, that the sequence of systems of equations that describes the transformation of the material structure of a concrete real cell means the transformation of the individual essence of that cell. So I think, if my thought experiment is correct, that there are good reasons to believe that the individual essence of a particular organism is not static. Based on this, the idea that an organism determines its individual essence through its own becoming does not seem unreasonable to me. Can I take 5 more minutes?
Excuse me, could I have a question? What is the first system of equations in such a case?
It would be a system of equations that describes the dynamic of the cell at the beginning of the cell cycle. The variables that you have, the parameters of each cell cycle.
Yeah, thank you.
And again, this is not how systems biologists work. It is a thought experiment.
Yeah.
And imagine that you could, from the solution of this system, somehow compute the variables of the next, and then the parameters of the next, and then of the third, and of the fourth. Of the fifth. This would be rolled up, so to say, in everything in the first. But I have never seen such a system of equations. Therefore, I doubt that this is possible. And again, this is not an advice for systems biologists. Systems biologists cannot do that because they don't solve philosophical problems. So the problem discussed here, and this is very important for me, has also a central linguistic dimension that should not be overlooked. The crucial question this is the final remark, okay? So the crucial question for the idea of the intrinsic determination of the individual essence of a cell is whether new dispositions arise in its cell cycle or not. Again, essence is dispositions. If new dispositions arise, then new essence arises. One could argue that the new kinds of proteins in the cell cycle do not represent anything really new, as they are produced over and over again like an automatism with each new cell cycle. So yes, okay, they appear in this cell cycle, but they were also in the other before. Why are they new? No, this is an important question. Answering the question of whether new dispositions arise during the cell cycle necessarily also has a linguistic dimension. It is crucial whether we describe the cell cycle in a natural or in a command-defined mathematical language. So are we talking in English or in Czech or in German or in Chinese about the cell cycle, or are we talking about it in a mathematical language? Because a certain form of language, in the case considered here a mathematical language, can produce statements that affirm the emergence of new dispositions, which cannot be stated in another form of language, for example, in English. It is well known that languages can make certain kinds of events visible or obscure them. If we choose the formal description of the organism by a system of equations, we choose a mathematical language and the dispositions are described by state spaces. So when considering a cell as a dynamic system, the entire material structure of the cell is reduced to what the system of equations contains, and is represented by the corresponding state space. When new forms of variables arise that were not included in the system of equations, they are new material factors, even if they have arisen repeatedly in the past. During previous cell cycles. In the natural language of ordinary descriptions, they are old quantities. But in the formal language of mathematical descriptions, they are new quantities that signify new dispositions. In the mathematical descriptions, they are new factors for the specific dynamic of this specific cell. Therefore, the fact that they are not new to the past of a given single cell is not important to that cell's current dynamics. The last picture. Of course, the possibility cannot be ruled out that modern biology knows or will find another materialistic answer that favors the idea of the invariance of the individual essence of a particular organism. Therefore, at the moment, I can only say the following. If we translate our current knowledge about the material processes and the relationships within an organism with the mathematical language of differential equations, there is reason to speculate about whether each single organism transforms its individual essence. So I leave, this is all I can say. There is the reason to speculate about whether each single organism transforms its individual essence. So I leave it open whether this transformation actually takes place, which is why there is a question mark at the end of the title of my talk, and also at the end of the title of the final section. And I limit myself to formulating the problem and possible solutions as I see them. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, it was very long.
Questions? Yeah, thank you for your talk. I would say that I basically agree with you. I also think that a good representation of organism at a given point of time is a point in n-dimensional space. This is like perfectly legitimate. But why would we still talk about this in terms of essence? To me, this term is completely obsolete still, and like you didn't convince me, right? Like you just convinced me that it doesn't make any sense to speak about constant parameters, that like every dimension of this n-dimensional space in which we represent organism as a trajectory, that each of these dimensions is variable, and there is like no specific parameter that would be constant throughout this trajectory. So that every dimension is variable, that's the claim. I agree with it, but why would we speak about essence?
Well, yes, why? Excuse me? Yes.
Life itself. It's continuous during throughout all these changes.
No, that's not the point. I think.
I know.
Yes, because it was also about individual essence, like nature. Like dimensionality. The dimensionality of the space is also like a different question, right? But why would we speak? Like to me, there are like two old words that plague philosophy, and one is essence, one is existence, right? And we can get
these two terms are very important.
Exactly, yeah. And we can get rid of both of them.
I'm a philosopher.
No, I'm biologist.
Okay, so is there a specific reason why you mentioned essence and existence?
Because they don't make sense without each other. Like essence is how it is, existence is how it appears to other existing perspectives, right?
So there is a very long tradition in history of Western philosophy that connects essence and existence.
Yes.
In Thomas of Aquinas, I mean, this is really a summary of my first presentation was 35 pages, and this was only 12. So anyway, I have many things to say about that. In Thomas of Aquinas, you find a very interesting connection between essence and existence that is repeated in systems in biological essentialism today. The same thing.
Yes.
by analytic philosophers. So Thomas of Aquinas says the essence of something exists without any reference to its existence.
Yes.
The essence of something is there even if it doesn't exist or have never existed. For example, he says that the essence of the phoenix, this mythological bird, is already there. Nobody has seen a phoenix, but its essence is there. Don't ask me what exactly the essence is. Take Brian Goodwin, one of the theoretical biologists and one of the protagonists of systems biology. He talks about the essence of species that have not arisen yet.
Yes.
And he thinks that you can compute them, put them in the computer, if you had a perfect system of simulations like my thought experiment, and you can construct organisms that have never appeared. He says that seriously. He talks about state spaces, about parameter spaces,
structures,
about parameter spaces, so this, it's not my construction. These people talk that there is the essence, an abstract mechanism that exists or is there without their real existence.
It has an explanatory power.
It has an, yes, this is what they think. But they want also to, it makes sense also in synthetic biology, because they design organisms that do not exist in the computer, the mathematical mechanism, these mathematical equations, and then they think if they manipulate the genome, they can produce these organisms. So it is not fantasy. It's not my fantasy.
No, but that's fine. But then still, I think this is some still inheritance from this ontological realism or something like that, and that everybody knows that it's meaningless.
But the other point to your question, my second answer is that this is not the only way talking about essence. This is the way of talking about essence in the framework of substance philosophy.
Yeah.
Platonic, Aristotelian. Aristotle was very complicated, by the way. It's always a very different thing talking about him. So in the Platonic tradition, we have an equation of essence with substance. In process philosophy, Bergson and Whitehead especially, but not only, also in Salzburg, essence is not anymore a substance, it's a process. And essence is the law of something. So because you have still some essential things and some accidental things.
I have a question. If the essence is something general, does it make sense to speak about essence of individual?
Yes.
It's still better. It's still better than the old way. It's still obsolete. To me, it looks like either the essence should be a general law that describes something, how the individual can be described by general law.
This is what the tradition said before Plotinus. Plotinus is the first one who said there are also individual essences of Attila, of Spyridon, of, I don't know your name.
Indra.
And he refers first to the physical features, but also to the intellect. And according to Plotinus, this individual essence is something static. It does not change. And we are just manifestations of it. Because he thinks of reincarnation. Yeah? So this essence incarnates again and again and again and again as an individual. And it produces independence to the external conditions and to other things, a particular form. But I don't know whether it does make sense to you.
It doesn't make sense to me because I'm comparing it to two contexts. So when I see the variation, for example, in the individual variation,
Yes.
I see that the individual. Well, I was thinking about it like the essence would be something general, and then the rest, the specific part is the context where the general realizes.
This is what the tradition says. For example, Plato says that the principium individualis, the principle that produces individuation, me, you, or your name? Peter, or Attila, or Anton, is we are all the same essence, human being, says Plato. But matter in me, matter in Peter, matter in Linda, matter in Anton. I'm not going to forget you. So, a matter, our material constitution, interacts with this essence and produces, so to say, the different physical forms. But Plotinus is the first who says, no, it can't be true. The differences are so essential, so to say, are so important that they can't be accidental, they can't be due to matter, because matter is the principle of resistance, in this answer philosophy. So Plotinus says, no, the individual differences must have an essential reason. And therefore he introduces the concept of essence, but he made it static. Essence does not change, says he. And then process philosophy, I belong to process philosophy's tradition. We talk about essence, but we understand essence as a process, not as a substance.
Yeah, okay.
This is the main difference.
But Anton was first.
Well, when I was young, there was a thought experiment. So if we sent a genome of a tiger to Mars, the Martians should be able to reconstitute the tiger. So my question is, what tiger? An embryon, a zygote, an adult tiger, a male or a female, or whatever? It is not in the genome. So what is the essence? Is it really a process, as you said? Yeah. External conditions are not taken into account at all. So no. Even if it would be possible. So what kind of tiger would be reconstituted?
I don't.
No, I have answer, but you can.
Implying something like that.
I think there is like a big difference between the description of organism in like some continuous parameter space and description of organism from the position of information theory, a series of bit or nucleotides or whatever. But they are to some extent convertible to one another, and like the closest that would we get to like these continuous parameters in this tiger on Mars example would be the number of copies of this sequence there and there, right? Like you would need to, yeah.
Yes, so
Do you want to answer, Anton?
I will try.
Yeah.
Okay. So the answer to your question depends, of course, on the metaphysical background.
So we have metaphysics again.
Yeah, of course, always.
You cannot abandon metaphysics.
So a substance ontologist of the 20th century would maybe say, well, today the substance or the static essence is the genome, is the sequence. This is the first alternative, the genetic program.
So the genome or the genetic program?
The genetic program would be the essence. Would be the essence in this case. I don't think so.
Where is the hardware?
Excuse me.
Where is the hardware for executing the program?
This is the second possibility, that you have to send the whole structure of the cell.
Yeah.
To send it with.
What is the whole structure of the cell? And we are again very, very hard problems.
Yeah, but this is the materialistic answer. In my second.
But then why to speak about the essence? That's my problem now. You put the equation essence equals mechanism. In the very beginning, I am uneasy with it for during the whole how your
No, I didn't say that this is my opinion. I say that this is what usually is said.
Yes.
So this is what usually is said in this mechanistic tradition. For example, in systems biology, you have this mechanism, and the mechanism is a whole system of equations with the parameters, the variables. At one time, you make a cut at a time, and you have something like a photography of the cell, and you put it in this trajectory in the computer, and here the trajectory runs. This is what they say or they do.
But the photography of myself is a very, very hard reduction of myself.
But you are arguing with Spyridon on something that he also does not agree on.
Yes, there's also
the next point would be.
You are the point.
I'm not finished with.
Okay, sorry.
The thing would be: is the essence the material structure, or is the essence something else?
Sure.
And I think that in each organism there is something else that cannot be described or reduced to this mechanistic approach. And the question is, what is the something else? But maybe next year we can talk about that. It's not possible. So the Bergsonian answer would be another answer, Hegelian a similar answer. I think that experience plays a role. I think that experience plays a very interesting role, a very essential role, and that this has causal power. So my biophilosophical answer from Webschool, from Conguilhem, from Portman, is that if we talk about matter, organismic matter, we have to change our understanding of matter as something passive. So matter would have an experiential and an interior side. But if I write that and send it to a journal for philosophy of biology today, they will send me to the psychiatry. And this is the problem.
Verbum interius is not
So you have a psychiatric here.
That's quite convenient.
Therefore, you'd never get a position or money if you say those things. But I say those things because it's
May we get to another question?
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to get to something like this, because if you think about essences or forms in traditional Greek philosophy, basically Aristotle was a biologist, so it's actually very, very useful to think about this. So the main insight is that you need these essences because you want to describe the situation where you have an individual being, living being, and you want just to define how it is as some kind of, something which persists in time and it has boundaries and so on. And at the same time, you can generalize it and say that, okay, there are some types. That's the essence. But the thing is that I think that even in Aristotle, the essence is pretty much dynamic, isn't it? So if we talk about this individual essence, so you start with something which is being just born, and then it grows, and it has some kind of acme, and then and that's one point. And the other one point I wanted to make, that if we talk in terms not of some materialist philosophers, but philosophers who really used forms and essences, Aristotelians and Platonists. So you always need something which is not material. Yeah. This form, even in Aristotle, is not material. It also always exists in matter, but it's different from it. It's a principle of structuration, let's say.
That's why
organization.
That's why I continue talking about essence.
Yeah.
And this goes to the very core of the problem: what is matter? What is causality?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and if we think that the causality cannot be reduced to these mathematical descriptions, and which presuppose a particular understanding of matter, then we have to think on non-materialistic terms. and then we enter a totally different, totally new field in which we will come to a new understanding of essence. So I think
not transcendental.
I don't know whether, but back to Aristotle. I said in some point in my lecture that we can say about the static of essence in Plato, but not necessarily in Aristotle. And today, some Plotinus interpreters say that in metaphysics, I think in book Zeta, they say that. If you read between the lines, you see that Aristotle was looking for a non-Platonic understanding of essence.
True.
For individual essences and for non-static essences. But it's not very explicit made there. But Plotinus did that. So even Aristotle did not think on essence just in universal Platonic terms, and maybe not in static terms.
I actually the answer to Peter. In Aristotle, you don't have this idea, we have these essences and we are giving existence to these essences. No, essence is here. Yeah. It's always existing. It's concrete. It's individual. And then I'm just, generalizing something.
But what is interesting is that today, contemporary materialists, which are systems theorists, are Platonic philosophers without immaterialism, of course, because the Platonism is for them a mathematical form, just it's this coexistence of modern of computers with Platonic ideas is a phenomenon that I cannot understand.
So can we get to Jacques? Jacques, you have a question.
It's maybe it's a question. Well, it's sort of not that important to the main point of your lecture, but which was fascinating, and thank you very much for it. But one thing that got me wondering is maybe it relates then to the linguistic question that you mentioned at the end, because I was wondering about the difference between system internal and system external parameters. Because if you take the example of the pendulum, for example, there is nothing in the formula itself that would allow you to make the difference between system internal and system external parameters. They are just parameters. So to make the difference, you sort of have to introduce a certain understanding. Now, maybe it relates to the linguistic problem of the difference between speaking about something in terms of mathematical formalism and then speaking about what a pendulum is in natural language, where suddenly, of course, the rod is more important or is more a part of the pendulum itself than the gravitational field. Yes. But it is also, in a sense, a way of introducing a preliminary understanding of what the essence of the pendulum is. By saying this is in system internal, you are saying this is part of the essence of the pendulum, and therefore it means you already know what the essence of the pendulum is, and that the length of the rod is part of it, and the gravitational field is not part of it, and it's something external. Or so it seems to me. Or I'm curious about whether you have some comments or thoughts about this.
Well, if we take a pendulum, it has a length. Of course, you can change the length. Yeah, and you can even have a mechanism that changes the length of the pendulum during but in this case, the mechanism is the structure, is the essence. It is fixed somehow. Mechanisms you cannot have a mechanism with a sub-mechanism, with a sub-mechanism, with a sub-mechanism, that there is always an end. And this end is the essence, the fixed essence. So I said it is just an internal parameter because it belongs to the structure. It belongs to the structure of this pendulum. Or each machine has a structure. If you construct a machine, you construct the structure of the machine. You don't construct the gravitation. The gravitation can change. You can take the same pendulum and put it on Moon, on Mars, I don't see a problem with that.
seems to me that,
in the mathematical language, they are just parameters. They are just symbols.
Like if you think about the system in abstract enough terms, then you can take the pendulum and switch the rod for a longer or shorter rod, and it's similar to taking the pendulum to Mars or having it here on Earth. And it's just, well, in both cases, you can change the circumstances so that the parameter changes.
Yes, of course.
So you can take the system to be like a parameter in a gravitational field, and then they are both system internal parameters.
Yes, you can even have a mechanism that changes the length of the pendulum independence of the G, of the gravitational field. Okay, you can have all kinds of structures. But in this case, the system internal parameter would not be the length L. It would be an abstract parameter that controls the relationship between L and G. It will be something in a meta mechanism, so to say. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense to you?
Yes, it makes sense. But,
Okay, so
I mean, it's not just the final.
The point would be, I mean, more interesting is that this distinction between system internal and system external parameters is more difficult in biology than in physics. This is another point for discussion.
My point is maybe it's dependent on like previous understanding of what we take the system to be.
Yeah,
that was sort of.
Sorry.
If I could break the chain of questions, because actually no.
Sorry. And I have the whole Ashkan was waiting for a long time. Then you get to.
It's just continuous with Jacques' question, and
I can be after him if it's continuous.
Okay, so say what you wanted to say.
I'll try to be quick.
And also your question, and then Ashkan.
Yes. So as I understand your question, another way of putting it is because the parameters to understanding the essence of a system must be introduced from some participant in the construction of an essence. Another way of looking at it is not just measuring mathematical variables of the pendulum, but why not ask the essence of the fact that the pendulum is red, say, which would come from a different kind of relationship that I formed to this system and this pendulum. Anyway, originally my question was about the necessity of essence in descriptive systems, and this presentation ended on a linguistic kind of quasi-determinate note. It could be significant that essence as a concept, depending on whichever philosophical or metaphysical system it comes from, is a imminent and almost necessary part of any kind of explanatory discourse, which in that case would legitimate the repetitive use of the question of essence, because essence is consistently caught up in the process of description itself, in which case you find yourself in a little bit of a linguistic determinist camp that would be similar to something like Noam Chomsky's interpretations of philosophy, which privileges the syntax, in which case essence becomes a problem of reference, and then again, a problem of relationship to the phenomena that isn't necessarily exclusively mathematical. Of course, how to translate that into a question, it becomes very open, because what do you want to do with that? Do you want to ask what a syntax is made of? If a syntax is composed of the same metaphysical machinations that the rest of the universe is caught up in, or if this fact of the linguistic construction of the syntax really has some kind of defiance against other mathematical essential determinisms or machinations, which would end you up in an anarchist Chomskyan camp. Yes. I suppose one way of asking a real question from this, you trace a history of the concept of essence through different thinkers, and put quite an emphasis on Thomas Aquinas. My understanding of the history of philosophy is that Aquinas is quite important for founding the scholastic school, in that he associated God and divinity and total explanation with causality itself, which would kind of be equivalent to essence being activity itself, because activity is abstractable and applicable to all things, and not necessarily in a way that has quality. You can't, okay. You ended on a distinction between using natural languages and I think
yes, this is not the main point. The main point is about the non-static character of essences, that there is good reason to think about that, and that if in some languages you cannot ask this question, in a natural language we will say, oh, they have already appeared, these dispositions are already there. But in this mathematical language you can put emphasis on what happens in this particular cell from this materialistic perspective again.
So could you foresee a future in which the mathematical explanatory languages of essences does not, it leaves out things that are included in natural linguistic explanatory systems of essences that are biologically or scientifically significant in a way that mathematics can't accommodate?
You didn't get exactly. Okay. Sorry, I'm maybe a little tired, but whether I can foresee a future in which
the natural linguistic explanatory systems of attributions of essences would be able to capture or describe something about phenomena and systems that mathematics necessarily in themselves would not be able to accommodate.
I don't know that. Okay. The question is more for me the other way around, whether I can foresee a future in which the mathematical language can capture things that are not captured in language. Because I cannot say anything about natural language, about the future of natural language. Who can say that? Nobody. So,
unless you're Chomsky.
It's a social phenomenon.
Somebody in Delphi.
So finally,
all right, to put it more tangible and not taking too much time, I need the pen to draw something on.
Yeah, you can just take the pen and draw over the text.
Sorry for if we have this space, all right, from which we have the biochemical. So this is just the probability space of all the available biochemical mechanisms.
Yes.
From which we come to organisms.
Yeah.
So if we have the species here and then like collective and individual, so they both come from here.
And these small things are species.
Individual. Thinking about this is the
different individuals.
This is the individual.
Yes.
The collective and the space.
The essence is
so
you can just do this.
Oh,
good. So they both come necessarily from here.
What is this?
Oh, this is the
mushroom
space available of the biochemical. This is the problem. What's happening?
You keep touching the screen. It's like,
oh, really? Yeah. I've got to stay away from it. Right. So this is the space for the biochemical processes available, and we come here to the species and individual. So individual comes from this at the same. So they have this shared base.
Yeah.
So the individual here, it doesn't come from that space, but I think the environment, like for example, think about the psychobiological interpretation of personality. In part, it comes from that space of biochemical things happening in the central nervous system. At the same time, it is the constant relation with the environment for that individual, which sort of makes the personality of the person.
Yes. Yeah, of course. But again, this is the problem of Umwelt, actually. I think I would say. In physics, you don't have Umwelts. In physics, you have Umgebung. Umgebung is the German word for surroundings. And the causality works without a filter, so to say. But in Umwelt, you have a filter. The organism filters what is important for it and what not. So the pendulum does not have Umwelt. The pendulum has always Umgebung. Yeah. But the organism is not this logic. This is this typical logic. Here are the dispositions. Disposition plus external conditions produce behavior or produce dynamics. This is actually a logic that have the contemporary philosophers of biology because they think physicalistically. They don't think really biologically. I think that Anglo-Saxon philosophy of biology is a philosophy of physics applied to organisms and not really philosophy of biology.
Yes.
So if this formula, essence creates dispositions plus external conditions make the outcome, the behavior or the dynamic or the phenotype or whatever. This is a physicalistic logic.
But isn't the physicalistic logic also moving towards like understanding what Umwelt means and the uniqueness of the doesn't it also like together with biology moving quite a same direction,
changing its essence?
I think that if we read carefully theoretical biology of Uexküll, what he says there about Umwelt is that the organism constructs the signs with which it understands or it interprets this Umwelt. So the signs are not there in the Umwelt. The organism constructs the signs that represent the Umwelt. And this construction process, he calls it a perception process. It's something creative that cannot be described mathematically, says Uexküll, or mechanistically. So he is a Kantian philosopher, of course, Uexküll. So there is something spontaneous in the construction of Umwelt that cannot be described mathematically or physicalistically. So this equation, again, this is important now for all of us. Essence creates the dispositions plus external conditions create phenotype, is a physicalistic logic. But this does not mean that if we reject the physicalistic logic, we have to reject essence. No, you can say essence and dispositions belong together, plus the creative activity of the organism, the creative interaction between organism and Umwelt creates the conditions. Somehow it is a filter of how the external conditions act on it. So does it make sense? So essence, dispositions, plus the spontaneous relationship, the non-mathematically, non-physicalistically describable connection between Umwelt and organism create the phenotype for the behavior.
Well, it takes a lot of effort just to grow the organisms under very, very strict external conditions and so on and so on. Then you can calculate something.
But this is an artificial thing. This very concrete,
almost impossible.
Yes, and this is not the biological logic, I would say.
Yeah. Sure.
But it's not against the conception of essence, what I just said. You can, in an Uexküllian logic, you can talk about essence in another way.
But is it not like presupposing it? Like the essence? Because it's just, for example, thinking about personality of an individual. It actually lies at the interface of something called essence. Yes. You do not know what it is. And
Uexküll was a Kantian philosopher, so the whole metaphysics is for epistemology. So talking about essence is not a metaphysical but an epistemological question. So, but we are entering now another field, the relationship between metaphysics and epistemology.
Okay, I can see that people are getting tired, but Attila also had a question. I remember. So it will be the last question, and just a reminder, we are going to a restaurant, so you can discuss similar topics.
You can torture me further.
Torture me further.
But I will drink black beer and I will water beer.
Our guest who has
dark beer. I don't know how to say that.
Where are you going to the?
Somewhere. At Bruselska, there are these garden restaurants. I don't know which one where they're.
Okay.
Yeah. Should we let you know that?
So I think, Spyridon, you did a great job in arguing with the mainstream of materialistic biology, and your point was that if we look at it carefully, then this individual essences are changing in a way that materialistic biology cannot describe. Therefore, something is important, is missing from materialistic approach. And what is beyond is the topic of future talks.
Yes.
Mainly because you were concentrated on that very important subject. And I think that this essences, what you are speaking about, it is for us personally very much interesting because we have an individual essence as our identity, as you also mentioned. And this, it seems, although it is debated, that our identity is the same during our lifetime. This is the general impression, that we are the same as we were when we were born. And but this is a point which may be different from the viewpoint of process philosophy, in which the self is constantly changing. But I think that the important thing, answering Indra's question, that individual is a specific something and essence is general. So how can have an individual essence? And I think the answer is that regarding our individual essence, which is constant during our lifetime, but our activities are changing, and we can even have feedback from the environment and our personality or the way we act, and we can realize our innate essence can be evolving and can be changing. So it is, our essence can be, it is more general in that framework than our activities, which is space-time, within space-time, and also variable and so on. But the thing is that our individual essence, although it is more general than our individual activities, but it is less general than human nature, which is even more general. And human nature is less general than living nature, that we are all living beings. And so it means that generality has a variety of different degrees. So we don't have to think that there exists something that there exists only two aspects, but generality has many different degrees, and they are playing very important roles. And it is very interesting topic, that what is the most general level of existence or causality. And I think I agree that essences are closely related to causality and existence and so on. But
to me, there is a question: where exactly the essence ends, because and where starts the environment or the context? Because from individual you can go even deeper in the mechanisms. On the molecular level you can go even below them, and each of the level would have an essence, and the level, different level, could be a generalization of the different levels. So so that in that case, like asking what essence is would be like where the essence ends and where starts the environment or the context. And what is the context and what is the essence? Where is the essence? What is it?
Okay.
Because
this question means now can be translated into, you are talking about the essence of an organism, and you talk about dispositions and the Umwelt, or the environment, to use a more neutral word.
Yeah.
So the concept of the essence is somehow connected with the idea that there is a strict separation between organism and environment.
No, but the organism itself composes of something. So in that sense, all the parts that the organism compound have their essence, have their dispositions, and the organism itself, for the component parts, it's is the environment.
Yes, but this is the materialistic approach, actually, that you say the proton is as it is, the electron is as it is, therefore the proteins are as they are, and if you put them together, you have a more complicated mechanism. But I don't think that this logic is so unquestionable. I think that the organism somehow must be able to. I have written, by the way, all those things, many things here. But it's in German. That's the main problem. It was published 5 years ago, and now I'm going to.
It is a natural language.
Not written in binary.
Yeah. So in this book, I make the statement that I didn't make here, that probably the essence of the material parts of the organism depends somehow on the organism.
Yes.
So that the organism is not simply a sum, a summation, or a summary, or a system that the part of which have fixed essences.
Biology starts when living organism has a causal influence. So a biological causality. This is different from the physical causality.
Yes.
And this is where biology begins.
Okay, so I will maybe thank you very much. According to the discussion, although everyone had to make his own lecture aside, that it was really interesting and for us rich in a lot of sense. And let's continue to the better place.
You can go on.